And very warm welcome to the session. I'm just quickly going to explain the rules of engagement. Please put yourself during the presentations on mute. Feel free to put your video on or off during the presentations. That's up to you. And feel free to pose your questions or thought-provoking ideas in the chat while we have the presentation. And there's plenty of time to have a discussion with each other after the two presentations. And we are very happy if there's an interactive discussion also with all of you. So please feel free to engage, because that's why we're here today. That being said, I would gladly give over the microphone to Lisa Herzog from the Rijksuniversiteit in Groningen, but also part of the Democratizing Work Network, to kick us off for the day. Enjoy.
Thanks so much, Fiona, and welcome everyone from all around the world. It's great to see so many people from different countries joining in. My name is Lisa, and I'm on the core team of the Democratizing Work initiative. This is a new series of webinars around the future of work that Democratizing Work and WageIndicator Foundation are organizing together. Democratizing Work is a global initiative attempting to foster worker-centered transitions in social and economic systems, guided by three principles: democratize work, decommodify work, and decarbonize the economy. We are a global network led by 13 female scholars with the aim to change the status quo and to bridge the gap between research and society. WageIndicator Foundation, with whom we have partnered up for the series, is a global independent nonprofit organization which, since the beginning of its work in 2000, has grown to a worldwide organization that collects, analyzes, and shares information on wages, minimum wages, living wages, labor law, gig and platform work, and collective agreement, with a mission to ensure more labor market transparency for workers, employers, and policymakers worldwide, advocating that all workers earn a fair wage under good conditions. So, as you can already see, there are lots of overlaps between these two organizations and their goals. We share the same values of making work better, but not in an economic sense, but from the perspective of workers of all kinds and in all places. And we are both global initiatives who are interested in bringing together global perspectives with a commitment to learn from each other. That's why we've paired up. And each webinar in the series will have a topic of relevance for the contemporary discussion about work, with 2 or 3 speakers who could give long lectures, but we've asked them to actually give pretty short input, so there will be time for discussion. And so we're looking forward to engaging with all of you. Today's topic is the way in which labor and the notion of value creation are still haunted by Western notions of what work is, what value is, based on theories and imaginaries that have been influenced by colonial practices and that exploit natural resources and human labor in many countries, but particularly in formerly colonized countries. And the question that we want to ask is how work and value creation can be reconceptualized in ways that avoid all these implicit assumptions and allow the flourishing of workers and the environment alike. So how can colonial work practices be made visible and overcome? And what does it mean for imagining the future of work in former colonies and beyond in a decolonial perspective? And we have 2 great speakers for this. I'm very happy that they both agreed to give us input. The first is Flavia Maximo, who's a labor law expert from Brazil. She's a professor of labor law at the Federal University of Ouro Preto in Brazil, researching decolonial feminism and other dissident epistemologies in labor law. And in addition, she also analyzes hybrid forms of workers' political struggles, and she's one of my co-conspirators on the Democratizing Work initiative. Janet Wandia is a strategy and business transformation enthusiast with experience in operations, finance, business strategy, project management, and gender inclusion. She has experience in global, where she participated in finance and expansion in Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, and Nigeria, and also as a consultant at KPMG. And she's currently part of the Job Tech Alliance, where she is the gender and job tech lead. And she works with job tech platforms to ensure that their platforms create jobs and improve livelihoods for young women. We'll have the 2 presentations first, and then we'll engage with the 2 speakers. We'll ask them to engage with each other, but also with all of you. And so we decided that we'd have Flavia's presentation first and then Janet's. And for that, I now need to share my screen to show the slides that Flavia has sent me. If you just give me a minute. Can people see the slides now? Does that work for everyone? I see people nodding. So with that, I give the floor to Flavia. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. It sounds good. Everyone is listening to me. Yeah.
Yes.
So, hi, everyone. I would like to thank Lisa for organizing this talk, WageIndicator Foundation. It's a pleasure to be here, sharing this space with Janet and with all of you that are here today. It's great to see like this diversity and a lot of people that are interested in decoloniality. Well, I want to start this conversation talking about secrets. I want to talk about the unsaid on work regulation and value, the unwritten part of it. I want to talk about labor law epistemic secrets. When we look at the facts, the existence of racist, sexist in the world of work is not much a secret anymore. But there is something beyond a factual description of oppression. The secrets I want to talk about here today, they are not just factual. They are epistemic secrets, secrets that hide that coloniality, race, gender, and sexuality are in the ways of producing, being, and knowing work regulation and value. These are not just secondary phenomena. They are the labor law's foundations, and they express themselves in its categories. Unveiling these secrets opens the door to rethink labor law itself for understanding how hierarchies of value, life, and knowledge are drawn and reproduced. Talk about these secrets is always a difficult wager because it involves reviewing categories that brought us here to this commonplace. It involves revealing what we do not want to show. So I'll tell a little secret about myself. When I was still a student in Brazil, I hated studying law. I just found myself in the counter-hegemonic perspective of labor law. The political praxis won me over. At these labor law lessons, I learned that the employment relationship was a consequence of major collective actions that took place in the Industrial Revolution. As a result, the employment relationship was our great achievement against capitalist exploitation. However, at the same time that I was listening to this labor law lesson, I looked out the window and I saw my working class. She didn't fit in this narrative. There were Black women babysitting white children, Black people cleaning the streets, and Black women cooking and selling cakes for white students. And when the white students came back home, there was a Black maid to clean the house, to wash the clothes, to cook, to do the dirty work. This scenario is showing me that there is an immense fracture between the labor law epistemology taught to us in class based on the employment relationship, which is mostly occupied by white men, and labor relations praxis in Brazil, but also in several countries from the global south. Was it a coincidence or a project of power? Is that a secret? Labor law insisting in keep its secrets from us. Its subject appears with no race, gender, sexuality, or location in any relation of power. But we need to reveal the secrets, raising some questions regarding work, regulation, and value, because we want a feature that is radically opposed to the one that is being designed in the world of work. So these are questions that have always bothered us, researchers from the global south, such as, what kind of work did labor law aim to protect? What kind of life does it shelter? Which livelihoods did labor law choose to prioritize? Who is the epistemic subject of labor law? In other words, what lives matter for labor law? This approach will come to the uncomfortable conclusion that the employment relationship, the standard category of labor law, is marked by coloniality. And with that, the question will be how to decolonize labor law. The starting point, however, is much more general. The formal end of the colonial world did not put an end to the power complex created in colonization. This is what the Peruvian sociologist Aníbal Quijano calls coloniality of power. The continuity of colonial domination forms beyond the formal end of colonialism itself. This Eurocentric work pattern controls various forms of social existence, including social classification of labor, gender, race, land, value, and knowledge production. Eurocentrism does not refer to all Western European cognitive history, but to a specific form of rationality that became worldwide hegemonic, rejecting all other non-European forms of knowledge, deemed then naive, irrational, or uncivilized. So when we're talking about decolonizing knowledge, including value creation work, we're not proposing the simple destruction of all European categories in another totalitarian perspective of knowledge. Decolonial thinking proposed a project of detachment from Eurocentric knowledge to make space for epistemic pluralism. So following Eurocentrism during the colonization, the white European man defined himself as the epistemic subject of knowledge and humanity in opposition to other living beings that did not have his characteristics, which were confined in the category of colonized. Coloniality of power was based on the social classification of the world's population around the idea of race. In a phenotype conception associated with the skin color and features, which does not have a known history before Latin America's colonization. Therefore, indigenous people were confined in servitude, blacks were enslaved, the Spanish and Portuguese men, as dominant white race, could occupy positions of power and receive wages. White European women were deemed sexually passive and physically fragile, confined in the domestic sphere, while non-white women were defined as sexual objects, but also strong enough to extend any kind of work, not only the domestic one. So only European white men could perform free work. This means that in the colonization of Latin America, there was an exclusive association of male whiteness with free work, with wages, with the standard of humanity, and this on so many levels remains still today. The creation of a geopolitical race identity allowed that the control of a specific form of labor could be at the same time the control of a group of people and also their knowledge production. In this sense, there was a coloniality of being, which imposes an anti-human ontological place for non-white people, women, and other living species. Hence, coloniality is not just an economic model, it's a civilizing paradigm, which is based on land expropriation, races, and gendered exploitation, but at the same time, it hides its dependence on nature, on non-white work, as well on forms of reproductive labor by denying their value. Therefore, despite being a subaltern achievement, labor law reproducing coloniality granted central visibility to one form of exploitation, the standard employment relationship. With this, Eurocentric labor sociality became the world's typical work. Aside from ignoring the work of care and social reproduction carried out primarily by women, this Eurocentric approach also excludes other forms of work, livelihoods, and land-based subsistence labor pursued by non-white people from the global south or settler colonial spaces, which today continue to be considered as local, marginal, or with low or non-economic value. The separation of work that generates market value over that which generates life is a racial colonial capitalist abstraction. This legal coloniality consigned those involved in reproductive work, informal activities, and land-based livelihoods to the epistemic category of nature or anti-humanity, and therefore without value. The decolonial perspective, together with feminist and environmental approaches, opens up the possibility of truly political discourse about how value is to be understood. The value created by human and non-human lives cannot be reduced to price or productive work. There are some dimensions of value creation that cannot be captured by the working hours mindset because they do not materialize themselves in concrete activities, even though they require energy from workers. Examples include value produced by the mental management of household tasks, or the value of belonging to a territory or a community, or the value generated by the ontological labor of subaltern people to survive in hegemonic work environments, such as Black people who must create strategies to survive in white workplaces. Decolonizing value requires situate its concept in the light of epistemic pluralism, in an equal dialogue with subaltern knowledges, which are forms of resistance based on geopolitical experience and memories of coloniality. So the task of revealing coloniality in work regulation value is not an easy one. But decoloniality is more than a theoretical whisper. It must be projected loudly, engaging with praxis, loud enough to remind us that mercantile time is not the only one that generates value. The life that matters is not only human, certainly not just male and white. That the nexus between labor, nature, and value can be different in dialogue with other worldviews. Here, we told some epistemic secrets of work regulation and value. Will the privileged listen? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Flavia, for this great introduction. I'll stop sharing my screen now, and then I hand the floor to Janet for your input. Janet, over to you.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Flavia. Very good presentation. Now, I'd like to bring you closer to Africa and just speak of what Flavia has spoken about in the context of Africa. And I hope all of you can hear me. Please give me a thumbs up. Okay, cool. So, and two things stood out to me when you spoke of coloniality, Flavia. And the first one is the highly capitalistic definition of success and what is called a good life, which is really adopted from the Western world, where we think that high productivity, a certain type of organizational culture, and a certain way of doing business is what is assumed to be a successful way of doing business. And even if you look at another thing is the labor structures, what you just mentioned on the policies and regulations, they are skewed towards a certain type of job, what I would want to call the white collar type of job, which require you to have a certain level of education and a certain career trajectory for you to hit the successful life that I had mentioned before. But if we come closer to home, 80% of African population is on the informal side of the labor. So who takes care of those? What does that mean? It means that there are no laws to guide against job security, having minimum benefits, governing the pay, and governing the work conditions. And now recently, in the current way of work and what we want to call the future of work, we are thinking of the platform world. The platform world has been advertised to bring in the new things and will be the silver bullet or the silver lining for Africa. How? It will create jobs. It will create flexible jobs. It will make Africa more available to the global world. And is this true? Just stop and ask yourself, is this true? Is this what is happening? And maybe not to give you an answer, but to give you a realistic way of looking at it. I want to give you a story of something that happened late last year and earlier this year. And I want to come closer home by coming to an example in Kenya, and closer home by discussing a job tech platform, which is one of the sectors that we work in. So this platform is called Summer. Summer works in the micro work sector, whereby one company outsources another to perform what we call menial jobs, similar to what Flavia was just describing right now. And in an attempt to finish a lot of things in a very short time of period. Now, maybe 10, 15 years from now, this will be being done by AI. But right now, as the AI is being built, this is being done by affordable labor. And where do you find the most affordable labor? In Africa. So Meta outsourced content moderation work to Sama. What is content moderation? You see how you go to Facebook, for example, or Instagram, and you get a post that is not comfortable for you to see, and you get a warning that tells you, hey, this is graphic content. So there's someone who checks to ensure that that block is kept there. What does this mean? A lot of us being spent looking at really traumatic content to be able to stop Janet and yourselves from looking at it if they don't want to. So 200 of these moderators started a class action late last year against Meta and Sama. And this, of course, fueled a lot of conversation. Is this sector actually right for Africa? Do we still have an aspect of coloniality still being done in Africa? Why is this being brought in Africa? And 3 key items stood out. The decency of work. Most of these moderators claim that by the time they were signing the contract, they knew that they were doing customer service, or what you'd say as content moderation, looking at image tagging, transcription, and so on and so forth. They didn't know that they would be doing this traumatic work. So a key question here is, what did Sama and Meta do to make this less uncomfortable for them? They offered them 30 minutes of post-traumatic stress disorder therapy sessions, but was it enough? Was there another way that they could have done this? Could they have given these moderators other tasks that would have sort of diluted the effects of their content moderation? Number 2, very, very important, is the level of pay. So this work, the workers stated that for them to do this work, they were being paid about $1 to $2 per hour. Now, for this same kind of work to be done, say, for example, in the United States, where Meta is coming from, they would have had to pay $10 per hour. I mean, we can argue that they are differing cost of livings or there are different realities. But I mean, having a 500% disparity in the level of pay begs the question of, is there something that they could have done better? Does it mean, the third consideration, does it mean that we should completely stop doing this work? We should say that this sector is not working, and they promise flexible work, but it is menial, it is leading to a lot of PTSD. No, it doesn't mean so. But what we really need to look at is, even if we are following for the business sense, we need to look at how can we make this less uncomfortable. But the key question I want to leave you with at the end of this presentation is, have things changed from the colonial period? Are there considerations being made in the global South to consider, what are we doing? Are we giving them dignity at work? Are we giving them a decent work environment? Are we paying them fairly? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. So 2 perspectives, one from Latin America, one from Africa, and I'm very tempted to now immediately jump into a comparison, but maybe I can invite you first to react. So Flavia, can you see similar issues in Latin America? And what do you think about these cases that Janet talked about, where it is indeed, again, labor law that's being used to try to protect those workers? And you had a pretty critical view of labor law in your talk, but here it still seems absolutely necessary.
So Janet, first, congratulations. That was like amazing insight. And of course, I see a lot of similarities, not only in Africa and Latin America, but also a lot of differences, because the category of Global South, we know there is a different name for put it like colonized people. There is no Global South, right? We are different, but the dialect of colonizer, colonized still continues. And you just prove in your narrative, like the universal narrative of where will bring you jobs, development. And like you said, like in the end of our presentation, this narrative maintained the same circuit of colonial to metropolis. So we're still like sending resources and value to this metropolis, and they control all the knowledge production and all the laws. So of course, labor law is very important to in some levels to diminish this inequality. But labor law also has an important role for maintaining this coloniality, because if the standard category is based on one type of exploitation, disregarding expropriation and other forms of labor, maintaining the same racial and sexual division of labor, that means that there is a coloniality and epistemic theory of labor law itself. So we're not diminishing inequalities. Labor law is also a way of maintaining this coloniality circuit.
Janet, do you want to react to this?
Oh, yes. There's one aspect that stood out to my mind when thinking about this example is on the impact of unionization, because if they had not formed a union, here we would not be speaking about this, and these people would still be suffering in summer. And the first time after they formed this union, maybe something else I need to tell you is that they were fired. And then when they went to court, they were reinstated. So what laws are there to protect unionization? And how can we change the negative attitudes towards unionization and have organizations actually use these unions as a way to improve the quality of work, as a way to negotiate and sit down and brainstorm and find a way of creating a decent way of working? And I don't know how unions have been working on your end, Flavia.
Flavia, you're still muted in case you want to reply to that question about unions.
Yeah, that's a good question, because collective organization in Latin America, now the mainly collective organization is not coming from unions. It's coming from hybrid social movements and labor movements that are actually outside the labor law structure, because the unions, I'm not going to say all of them, but from my perspective in Brazil, they were captured by the perspective of the employer. So, of course, there are some that are resistant, but there are some that are pretty well with this colonial structure. So we see this new movement in Latin America of feminist international strikes, boycotts, using technology. They are much more powerful than the formal institution of the union itself, that still responds to a very modern framework of law and still responds to a sociality that was not ours. Like you said, we are built in informality, we are built in gig economy, and unions, they respond to formality. So I think we're trying to fight with the unions, but we're also trying to figure out other forms of collective organization.
Thank you. We can now start to open the discussion with other participants, and we are very much looking forward to your questions and comments. You can either use the hand raise function, or you can just write in the chat that you have a question, or type a question in the chat if you're not in a position where you can talk, and then we can read it out. While we're waiting for questions to come up, I want to ask another question, because I know that both of you care a lot about this, namely the gender question. And it came up in your talks, but sort of implicitly. So maybe you could be a bit more explicit about the role that gender plays in these issues, or to put it a bit pointedly, what difference does it make whether the work in these contexts is done by men or women? And I'm not saying this in order to hold up old dichotomies, but just as social categories, as you can imagine. Jenny, do you want to start maybe, and then Flavia?
Yeah, I can start on this. Interesting thing is that if you think about the history, pre-colonial period, we had matriarchal kind of societies in Africa. Well, we did not have matriarchal nations, but we did have small tribes that were matriarchal in nature, and no one really thought of patriarchy. But post-colonialization and post-religiosity, we found a lot of patriarchy happening. So we still have undertones of this existing today in terms of power, in terms of the nature of the jobs that women are expected to be doing. in terms of even, if you go to some African regions, you'd find that women are not even expected to do the work to begin with, because, I mean, their role is to take care of the family. One tribe in Kenya, for example, normally sees women as part of the children. And so there's a lot to be done in terms of ensuring that we empower women and include them in the future of work. Now, if I were to come close to what I work with in the platform world, how can job tech platforms help to include more women? So most of these platforms are built based on algorithms. And remember, algorithms or any machine learning sort of way of working learns from something. And what does that mean? It learns from the current disparities or biasness that we have in the society. So what we need to do when considering on the working mechanism of the platforms or the kind of users or stakeholders that the platform touches, we need to manually or really be intentional about thinking about how to include all stakeholders. So for instance, looking at platform design, is it designed in a way that it attracts women? For instance, if we are talking of maybe one of the most common types of platforms, ride-hailing platforms, and you want to advertise for new couriers to join your platform, but you have a really nice, macho-looking young man seated on a motorcycle, how are you going to attract the women? You're already introducing the bias of the society that pre-exists into the organizations. And these undertones exist in all aspects of the platforms. So it's very, very important, especially considering the future of work, to consider these small undertones. Otherwise, what will happen is that 10, 15 years from now, we'll have gone back to the 70s, where the ratio of men to women participating in the work environment and the new work which will have come then will not include women.
Thank you. Flavia, you want to?
Janet, this was an amazing answer, because this is one of the face of data-driven economy, which is data coloniality, right? Some authors call it like data colonialism, but I prefer coloniality because the end of formal colonization has different forms of exploitation, expropriation. But like you said, algorithms, they are going to, through machine learning, maintain the same power patterns of gender, race, and geopolitical discrimination, because they're exposed to a very limited databases. And we know that the Global South doesn't have the same access as users as Global North. And when they have access, the access is limited, and their data is classified with gender and race stereotypes by algorithms. So there are a lot of research about it. And trying to relate this to our main theme, which is value, I think gender defines what is value for work regulation. So what we recognize in labor law or labor regulation as value is an androcentric and white concept of value, because it responds to patriarchy, and patriarchy is not universal, like Janet said, because before colonization, there are some societies in Latin America and Africa that were not based on this kind of sexual division of labor. So we're talking here about the kind of value that has a Eurocentric, white, and patriarchal framework who was transposed to labor law regulations. And this defined the devaluation of reproduction, work, of values of different cosmologies, like African perspectives or Latin America's perspectives. So I think gender and race are the very core categories to define what value is.
Yeah, and if I can just add from an experience I recently had, so I was in a working group with academics in Europe, so not global at all, but even there was a dispute between a sociologist, a woman, and an economist, a man, and the sociologist and me also, we argued for including a greater emphasis on unpaid work done in families into the public discussion. Very simple point, you think, But the economists, and there were several of them, they were very skeptical because they said, well, we first need to earn money in paid jobs because then we can pay for this other work that's being done in families or also volunteering work. And the sociologists and I were like, yeah, but don't you see that this other work needs to happen first for productive work as they understood it, in like defined by market value, to ever take place? But I'm not sure we got it across. So just saying that even when it's just within one European country, the assumption that value is just what happens in markets is still very strong, and I think very harmful. But now I see that there are some questions and comments in the chat. The first one is from Eleni Kiritsi. I don't know, Ellen, can you speak yourself? Would you like to join by switching your camera and mic on, or should I read the question? Yeah,
Yes, of course.
Yes, great.
As much
Over
as
to
I
you.
can because I'm at work.
Go ahead.
So I was thinking that in Greece there is also this case of crypto colonialism, which happens when foreign companies come here and they establish some branches here and they hire Greek people to do the dirty work, basically, and the managerial levels are all taken up by Germans or British or whoever is the company belongs to. And in this case, I just think that this turns us into the landscape is completely changed when that happens. There are no unions anymore like they used to, and people are afraid to even look up the law and their rights. And this is something that I believe is very linked to the Americanization of the culture. Like we feel good to work for a big corporation, even though we don't actually see any benefits in payment or in any other form.
Thank you, Eleni. Flavia or Janet, do you want to react? Or should we collect a few comments and questions maybe? Let's do that then. I see Shantanu also. Shantanu Kishwar, you are here as well. Do you want to speak as well? Hi.
So I have a couple of questions and both of them are long, so feel free to pause me at any time and address them. But I'll actually pose my second question first, because so I'm from India, where there is a big discussion about low female labor participation rates in that, and especially as India has gotten richer, our labor force participation for women has gone down. And in affluent households, it's that because women don't need to work to contribute to the household financially, they shouldn't work. Now, that by most sort of social, like economists, sociologists, etc., talk about that, like say that is hindering equality, equality for women. It's limiting them and what they can or should do. But conservative groups actually turn it on its head, and they say that the very idea of women should, again, quote unquote, be in the household, and the idea that we should be trying to boost labor force participation is a very Western way of looking at things. That it is inherently a colonial mindset that gets us to look at that. That feels like a very warped, repressive, like it's finding a warped justification for it. But when you talk about something like decolonizing, the economy and the way that you're looking at labor markets, how would you square these ideas in your mind?
That is indeed a complicated constellation. Thank you, Shantanu. Now I hand over to Janet and Flavia again. Who of you wants to go first? Flavia, maybe you this time?
Janet, do you want that I go first? Yeah? Okay. So the second question is, I think one, when we're talking about decolonized value in the economy, it's a long process because we have to change categories that the epistemic framework of economy was based. And then that's not going to be solved in a short term. But we can also adopt some measures to occupy these categories with a political intention in a strategic way. So there are a lot of like feminist perspectives that you already mentioned here. They're being used in Latin America, for example. The time use research that is happening in Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, that you like use time diaries to measure these time dimensions. They're not reachable by working hours mindset. So, for example, if you're a mom, a working mom, and you have to go to your job outside your place, and you always are thinking in your child at home, but when you go back to your place, you're always thinking that you're going to lose some power positions in your career. So this like absence presence is a kind of time that is not measured by working hours mindset and this epistemic framework of coloniality. So they're using time diaries to measure these activities, these simultaneous and enrichment activities, and then translating these and GDP. And just to show like how the amount of percentage of this work is part of GDP. Just like also in a way to show that reproductive work is not an input of productive work. Actually, it sustains productive work. This is something in the short term. Also, in some countries, Argentina, they are like. Are you listening to me? Are you listening? Yeah. Yeah.
There was a bit of a technical problem, but now it's good again.
Yeah. Yeah.
No worries.
They are trying to put like a kind of when you're like contributing for Social Security, they try to replace the money that you currently contribute to Social Security for the time that you use to take care of your children. So in this way, you're trying to pluralize what is value, because it's not money, but timing of taking care of children. So that's a perspective. But for me, an example that is like a very decolonial is Ana Virginia's work with waste speakers in Brazil. I think is a good experience to pluralize value. The waste pickers, people who collect waste in Brazil, they are informal. And during the pandemics, they realize how important they are. And they start doing like a strike informally. And these researchers going to the field, they talking with them, they realized that the value that was important for them was the environmental one. And they put this in the law, the environmental value of waste pickers. And putting that in the law, a requirement was that they organize themselves collectively in cooperatives. And this law transfer a minimum income for these waste pickers because of the environmental value of their work. So this is an example how you can pluralize value without using market basis criteria. Well, of course, that doesn't change the whole framework of economic measurement.
Thank you. Janet.
Yeah, thank you. I like how you've approached this from an aspect of power and value, because I think that's the most important bit. It's not what's not too important is whether they are working from home, doing the unpaid care work, or going to an office. But what is the level of power at home? Are the women able to make decisions? Are they able to do something as simple as make purchase decisions, like think of buying a house? Are they able to contribute if they are not going to work and earning this money? Are they able to be part, feel even how they feel? Do they feel like they're part of the decision-making process? And I think by them having power, even if they're staying at home, they will see that there is value in what they are contributing. It will be just like a division of work. And another way to look at it is if women decide, say for instance, the ones who are working, if they decide to stay at home, are they being compensated for this, as she mentioned, with social security? Now, for some economies, like African economies, we are not yet in a place where social security will be able to afford to pay you. But let me start from these corporations that we are working for, like the multinational corporations. Are they compensating the women fairly? What if there's something wrong, or there's a sort of reason why the woman has to stay longer at home? What does that mean for her job? And that still zeroes down to the aspect of power. If she stays at home, what does it mean for the woman in terms of making decisions for the home and making decisions for the family that we have here? And I think that's a better way of approaching it, as opposed to approaching it from the terms of the value or monetary value that they're bringing home.
Thank you. So we are already now moving into questions of what could change. And one big thing, which Eleni's contribution also emphasized, is cultural change of what we see as value. I now want to ask Paolo Borghi. Paolo, are you here and can speak in person, or should I read your question? I don't see him, so I will read the...
Oh, I'm so sorry for interrupting you. After you're done, I just have a follow-up, but after this question,
yes,
then it's okay.
Yes, we can get back to this, but let me now read Paolo Borghi's question. And he writes, studies on digital, in parentheses, labor platforms have clearly demonstrated expropriation and exploitation effects on platforms' business models. How can we hope platforms behave differently in the global south? In other words, how can we be enthusiastic of their expansion? Or maybe if I can add, what can be done to prevent that kind of expansion? And I think that's maybe first a question for Janet, because you're directly working about this, but I know that Flavia has also worked on platform-based employment in the past. So maybe you first, Janet?
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Paolo's not here.
Very, very, very interesting questions here. And I want to start by saying, I would walk away from trying to bulk up all the platforms and assuming that all of them are exploiting people in the global south, or they're exploiting their workers. And I would really look at it from the sense of, what is their business structure? What are their practices? What are they trying to achieve? And what is not stopping them from the bad practices? And I want to go back to the beginning. So remember, the platform world came to this informal economy. At the beginning, remember I mentioned that most African societies, or most countries in the global south, do not have well-established labor structures. That means that they do not have well-established policies and regulations. Most of these regulations were created post-colonial period, and you'd be surprised to find that they have never been updated. So they really are geared towards the white collar, or the professional who's employed in those kind of jobs. So now when the platform world came in, it came in a period where no one knew what to do with them in terms of policies and laws and regulations. And the platform world grew so fast, especially in Africa, that the government or the policymakers did not have enough time to quickly catch up. And now they're actually playing catch up to the growth of the platform world. So what does this mean? It means that people will be able to act within the gray areas. They'll be able to push the limit a little bit, because really they're not breaking the law. There's just none that exists that covers that sort of world. And this even especially becomes worse when you infuse technology into this, because technology is this new thing that is constantly changing, and most policymakers can't, not even policymakers, most people in the world can't actually grapple their mind around what is happening in the platform world. Having said that, it doesn't mean that all is bad. For instance, there's been a lot of work, I don't know if you know of Fairworks, there's been a lot of work by Fairworks in trying to, Fairworks is an organization that's trying to lobby for decent work. And they have given 5 principles, which if platforms try to work within these principles, they will be able to give a more decent kind of work environment. Now, do all platforms adhere to this? No. But currently, with a lot of limelight being shown on the platforms, both from the investors' side, from the customers' end, and from the policymakers, people are really beginning to think about this, and people are really beginning to think, what is the quality of work? And I mean, such conversations like what we're having right here with WageIndicator is one of the effects of the world beginning to question this. But does it mean that we are there yet? We are far from there. It just doesn't mean that we should walk away from platforms just because these things have been happening.
Thank you, Janet. Do you want to add something, Flavia?
Yeah, ciao Paolo. Paolo is from Democratizing Work Network in Italy. We met each other when I was there, and thank you for being here. So I think in the perspective of Latin America, we have like two dimensions of platform work. And it depends on race and class, because in Brazil and in South America in general, and Latin America, race and class are indissociable, or just like they are always imbricated. So in upper levels, like middle class, which becomes whiter, we have these people working platform works, but in terms of diversity washing. Big techs, they captured these people from Global South just to say that they have diversity in their companies, but they pay less and they don't formalize them. And so we have a lot of frauds of that, like consultants, but they are real employees. This is like a higher class level and whiter. But in a low class, there are like Black people. We're talking about informality and very precarious kinds of work. So we're talking about riders, we're talking about clicking farms, and in this level of platform works, we're talking about people that don't have conditions to survive, and how they are trying to resist. They are trying first struggling in the pandemics. There were a huge boycott and strike organization in Latin America that we call Break dos Apps, that the writers call the users to not use delivery food apps for one day and classify these apps in Google and Apple Store with 1 star. And this spread for Latin America for 1 week, because they want like minimal wages and like at least like some minimal conditions of work. This was massive. And also we were trying to move in decolonial methods, listen to the workers and work with them, not speaking for them, how they want to organize themselves. So for example, at my university, we are doing field work with platform workers, writers of delivery apps, trying to build with them an algorithm, an app that they control as a cooperative. So that is other form of resistance, like use theory, connect to praxis.
Thank you so much. Paolo, do you want to briefly react?
No, thank you. Just to say thank you to both. It's a big issue. So sorry, my question is about a big issue. I think I collected new information and ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe we can go back to Shantanu then, and then also Fiona. Shantanu, you had another question, or you wanted to react to some of the points?
Yes, I mean, it's sort of a follow-up, I think, to my previous question, in that, so, okay, if I understand what you're saying about, I mean, I think finding alternative ways to also account for women in the larger economy and society. But so now, okay, a lot of the people who, for example, have said that we shouldn't worry about women's labor force participation, and that's a colonial imposition or a Western way of looking at things, are men who are saying it, right? And I think it's also obviously beneficial for them to say it, because I think with with increased women's labor force participation, one of the fundamental things that comes is economic empowerment that could, at the very basically, help, say, women leave abusive or unhappy marriages, which they can't to a large extent in India because they're just financially dependent and have nowhere else, like don't really have an alternative, because again, in India, like the bride's or the wife's parents won't accept her back after she's gone. I mean, there are these sort of messy situations which at one level, at least from my limited understanding, increasing something like female labor force participation could end. Are there other logistical measures that can be taken at a social and economic level that can have the same positive impact, even if it's not directly about increasing labor force participation?
Flavia or Janet, who wants to answer that question? Which is, of course, again, a big one.
Also, I hope it's clear. In case it isn't, I'll try to clarify it. I don't know if I made full sense.
Yeah, I was going to ask you
Janet,
to clarify it. It's not 100% clear.
Sure. So what I was getting at is that there are larger social and economic benefits that happen, I mean, again, for women, but also to society at large with increased female labor force participation. One example is increased economic empowerment, which I think helps women just, again, escape a lot of unhealthy situations that they're otherwise forced into because of economic disempowerment. So if we look at alternatives to conventional increase in labor force participation, are there alternatives that achieve the same ends in terms of empowerment without the same basic means of increased labor force participation?
Janet, do you want to respond?
Yeah, an interesting question of trying to increase. I'm just trying to, think through it. Trying to increase the level of empowerment for women without thinking of labor participation. And I want to ask you, by labor participation, do you mean the professional labor participation or any form of labor participation?
Any form of labor participation that enables economic empowerment. That was my and the reason I ask it is because there's this sort of U-shaped thing where poorer households have very low participation rate, medium income households have higher participation rates, and affluent households have lower ones. Now, at both the ends where participation rates are low, women are very often left in difficult situations. And I think, again, in affluent households, you also have the combination where they're likely educated, but not empowered in that way. And so any alternate means that would enable that. So, I mean, labor force participation to me in a professional setting is the most common one or the most obvious one, but are there other ones that you can think of?
Yeah, well, to start with your second question, there are very many alternatives apart from the professional labor force participation. And if you think of it in terms of, even as they stay at home, if they decided to stay at home, they could do their own small business there. And women are very good at social commerce and really sell their services or products to their society, the people who are close to them. And that would sort of shift the power balance. But to answer your question about what can be done apart from really labor force participation, I think to think about this, we need to go back to what could be, and I'm saying this just based on the comments that you've just given, what could be the main source of the U-shaped curve that you're describing? And I think this is cultural and norms. Now, cultural and norms are not very easy thing to actually change in our society. It is something that requires a very long period of systemic changes. So systemic changes here would be a mix of the easier bit, which is setting up policies or setting up regulation and laws that support the change of this thinking. And the harder bit would be to actually educate and have continual challenges of the cultural way of living. And this is not something that I want to say that is very easy. A lot of people have tried to do it. And that's why we're actually in this place having this conversation. But I feel like small changes could actually have a big impact. Like one thing that comes to my mind in terms of thinking of these systemic changes is why, instead of starting with the women, why not start with the men and the older generation who can act as agents for these changes? Because you see, with a systemic change, it is something that will change over generation. So even if we are trying to educate our current kids right now of what you should be thinking of in the future, or this is the new way of thinking, there is equality and empowerment, they go back home and they live in an environment which speaks the opposite. And naturally, even you would really respect what you hear from home, especially from the older generation or your parents, you that would stick more than what you're taught in school. So how about start making these changes from this sort of generation, and also the men themselves, to make them agents of this change. And this is something that slowly will continue having that snowballing effect, and maybe 20, 30, 50 years from now, we'll see the curve beginning to steepen a bit. I don't know if Flavia, if you have anything else.
I completely agree with you, because we are still in this mindset that market value is the only one which matters. We only think about economic empowerment. What is empowerment is always like also another word that was captured by capitalists to do diversity washing, right? So of course, the economic redistribution is important. And we have experience in Latin America with Bolsa Familia. There is like an income transfer from women, poor women, usually Black, who have kids, and to trying to give some autonomy to these people to develop their capabilities. Could be, of course, getting another kind of work outside the reproductive sphere, but it could be also go to a university, like changing this pattern that these people are always serving white people. So I also would add knowledge production. The kind of knowledge production that were still based in, I'm not talking only about universities, I'm talking about ILO, I'm talking about UN, I'm talking about companies. They are still in the same knowledge paradigm, which is white and undercentric and focus on global north issues. So how change a knowledge paradigm? First, changing research methods. We cannot do research without going in the field anymore. Like we are talking about work without having contact with workers themselves. And sometimes, like I see like labor lawyers saying, we have to recognize employment relationship for these platform workers. And these platform workers, they don't want that. They want a different kind of recognition. So we have to situate knowledge regarding to local necessities. There is not a universal answer for like gender, race, and class problems. So we have to go in the field to see what they need to find the best answer. And this is knowledge production. And also at universities, when I remember what kind of law I studied was German and Italian law. I learned about Industrial Revolution. I didn't learn about strikes that were done by slavery people. So this is also a kind of epistemic violence that gives us the impression that we cannot having like a political consciousness to do theory, only being studied cases, I guess. So I think affirmative actions in universities in Brazil were a very good example how to change this knowledge production. Of course, that this is not enough, but it is the beginning.
Thank you. And apologies for having been disconnected for a couple of minutes. My internet connection failed me. Fiona, you also wanted to ask a question.
Thanks a lot. Not per se a question, but more a reflection, because the discussion reminds me a lot of a very recent podcast that we did with James Ferrer, which is a guy an old white dude, but an Uber driver in the UK who sued Uber for a couple of million pounds. And he talked in his talk very much about that there's not two powers anymore in terms of the labor force and the employer, but also data in the mix. And Flavia, you just spoke about knowledge production, but also who holds the knowledge and how much knowledge is power, obviously, and data is also power. And he reflects on how, especially when we talk about labor platform or digital labor platforms, the company says they don't take any responsibility for those that use their platform to work. But at the same time, they do have all of the personal data, both from the users as well as from the workers who use the platform. And that creates such a huge power imbalance as such that those workers that use the platform, whether or not it's regulated or all of those discussions, makes it even more difficult and creates these issues that Paula also shared. And so I was just thinking in terms of the discussion about decolonizing work, and also thinking about the value creation. How can we put data into this mix, because it is a very important piece, and also who owns the data and who has access to it, right?
Thank you. That is indeed a big question. Janet, you want to go first, or Flavia? Janet?
I can go first if Janet
Okay,
wants.
then
I don't know, Janet, what do you prefer? I don't.
Flavia, why don't
You can
start
go
this
first.
time? Yeah.
So, Fiona, thanks for the question. This is a big question. When we start like studying laws of data, we're going to see that the whole framework of these laws are for giving more power to data protection of these companies. Like the data laws are not designed to provide social rights. They're provided in a kind of private protection of data. So this, in the framework of labor law, it's a difficult problem, because, for example, to show that the algorithm of Uber, like you said the example, it's actually a manager that is like controlling each aspect of these riders' work, we don't have access. So we try, for example, in labor courts in Brazil, using a lot of the Isabel Ferreira's theory, considering that these big techs have more influence in public policies in the economy than state institutions themselves. We try to consider these big tech companies as public institutions, and we try to apply the transparency law in this algorithm, because public institutions, they have to respond through transparency, so to like give a kind of satisfaction to the citizens. And we try to do that to break the code, to access the code of the Uber's algorithm. Of course, was denied. And we try to do this in a network. Like we have a network of labor lawyers, and we all file the same cause at the same time, more than 600 suits, like law causes, to apply this transparency law. Because if these entities are more influential than the parliament for itself, so why they are not taking accountability to this work regulations? They're like setting the boundaries. And this is one thing, considering big techs as political entities. That is the thesis of Isabel Ferreira of our like core group. Another thing is considering data like using these networks as labor. We already have like a lot of scholars that are nominating this data use as heteromation, because like if you like expand the concept of labor, if you think about it, like we're talking about the concept of labor, it's like spending energy to generate value in time. So when you're using these networks, or like you generate data, and data is capital, data is value. So why you do not recognize this kind of activities as work? So this we call automation, and we're trying to apply this as social security time of contribution here in some of lawsuits in Brazil. But it's like some just ideas to change this data framework.
Thank you, Flavia. And I think what these examples show very nicely is that law can really be a very flexible tool, but at the moment it's still very often the tool of the big corporations and not the tool that labor lawyers together with workers can use for strengthening their voice. Are the dynamics in the countries that you are working in similar, or are there different considerations there, Janet? Is there this legal fight about data as well going on?
Yes, it's a funny story here because we have, well, I feel like there are three forces fighting this legal fight. There is the government or the lawmakers or the policy makers, there's the platforms, and there's the user, which is you and me. And the first thing that I thought of when that question was asked was an organization called WorldCoin in August came to Kenya. I don't know if any of you heard of it. And they were purchasing biometric data from Kenyans at a very good cost price of $49. And there was a huge long queue of people waiting to actually get this free money because people did not understand what this meant. And they were picking fingerprints, the iris, a picture of the iris. And this is very personal biometric data. And people are even trying to figure out how can we get more of these funds? How can we cheat the system and get more of this money? But this company was stopped, especially because it was very interesting that they were doing all this just outside the parliament. So it was very easy for the government to catch up. And they went to court, and the company said that it had received all the required licenses to do any type of work in Kenya. But one license, or one of the processes that was silently missing, was going to the Office of Data Protection. So the Office of Data Protection came back to them and asked them, hey, I didn't see your application on my desk. Why wasn't it there? And it became a he say, she say kind of situation between the different government agencies. And this is just to show you how fast the world is changing for the lawmakers, because what is happening here is that there is a very good process, but not a process that includes data protection into this. And also, when I think of data, apart from thinking of it from the line of data protection, I want to now pose a comment or a question on the side of the gig workers themselves. So if, say, for example, Uber came into Kenya in 2015, and since 2015, I've been working for Uber, but I feel like it's time for a change, and I want to go to this new local platform. As it is right now, the gig worker cannot transfer any of their good performance metrics from that side to this other side of the new employer that wants to employ them. If I wanted to leave my current employer and go to the next one, I have a very easy way of tabulating. Like, for instance, I could write it on LinkedIn and tabulate all my past experience, and to be very easy for me to attract a new employer. But how is it for gig workers? And how can they actually do these data transfers? And these are some of the questions that come up with the changes that we are having in the way that work is being done. There are lots of considerations and data exchanges. Apart from just the security point of view, how can we take advantage of data to make the livelihoods of the gig workers, or even to make the onboarding process for the platforms easier?
Yeah, that is a very interesting example, because you could say that what's at stake here is really also the reputation of these workers. And you could even say to some extent it's part of their identity, but it's coded in data that are owned by one platform that are not transferable. And you know, in older histories of ideas about the economy, the honor of people played a big role, because the honor of someone is an indication of whether you can trust them. And now we have certain kinds of economies around platforms where whether you can trust someone gets coded in data, but they are not located with the individual any longer, but with these platforms, and they don't have a right to take them over to some other employer, which basically keeps them hostage. That's a very interesting example. Thank you. Do we have more questions from the audience at this point? I don't see any hands, and I haven't seen any more comments in the chat. So then let me throw my big final question at Flavia and Janet. And I know that there can't be like complete answers or anything, but if you had a magic wand and you could change some of the legal or political structures in the way in which this colonial form of work currently happens, is there one lever that you think should be moved because it will really have a big impact? If you had one wish and you could say that's what needs to change, what would it be? Or maybe you can also tell me that's a wrong way of thinking about it because the reality is so complex. But maybe you can just pick one example of where you would really want to see concrete change. You're still muted.
Flavia, do you want to go first?
No, you can go first.
Up to
You
you.
need some more time to think about it. Lisa, that's a very complicated question. And I'll say this because the labor structures or the economies are very, very complicated with a lot of market forces and different forces affecting them. And these are both inside the region we are speaking about and external forces that we are speaking about. And I think a key thing that I would, if there's one thing that I think would be really key in changing that I would really try to maybe change if I had a magic wand is on research, because, and maybe this comes from where I work in, I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions with how things are on the ground, how, for example, are platforms working in Africa? How are the labor markets working in Africa? If we say that only 20% of the Africans are participating in the labor economy, where are these Africans? Does it mean that they're at home? What is their real reality? Like, get that researched and published, and not researched as I want to use the words that Flavia used earlier on, with the notion of the Western world and what they're trying to look for, but really just getting your boots dirty, walking in the muddy areas, and coming out with good findings. And what that would do is that it will remove a lot of what the ignorance that we have. And I say all of us because even some of us as Africans, even I myself, I'm sure I have a level of ignorance about my own country or my own continent. So remove some of that ignorance. And so that even as we are trying to create a better working environment or a better world or create a better future of work, we don't have that ignorance, and we are giving realistic solutions to problems that actually exist. Yeah.
Thank you. If I could just add one thought or reflection, it would of course also help if researchers, the ones who count as experts on something like labor markets, came from a more diverse range of social backgrounds and geographical backgrounds. And
exactly.
I mean, we could also have had a webinar here on decolonializing research and academia and what counts as good research and so on. But yeah, thank you for this. Flavia.
Lisa, that's a tricky question, but I will engage with Janet's answer in the sense that I think if I have a magic wand, I would like to have parity of gender and race in a geopolitical perspective in all power institutions worldwide. Because if we're talking about changing knowledge paradigms, you have to have diversity, and not only in representative ways, not only to show, but also about what is important for these people, for their community, what is valuable for them. So, like if for some Western countries, having money is important, for some communities in Latin America, it's not. So this is in the core of the labor rights, but also in human rights, like what we value as minimum, as legal. It's framed in only one knowledge paradigm. So I believe that putting diversity in these power positions will generate another kind of knowledge, but not just one, a plural knowledge. So I really believe that epistemic pluralism with epistemic responsibility is one way to fight this colonial background.
And of course, that presupposes that in order to come into positions of power at the ILO or at, I don't know,
Of course.
You don't filter out everyone who maybe has a different skin color or a different gender, but only shares the valuation systems and the reputation games that are being played that we currently see there.
Let's be honest. Like Janet said, why do you guys think that I represent Brazil?
Well, in the sense that you know more about Brazil than most
but
of
like
us do.
I'm just saying that here I'm rated as white. I'm an upper class. I speak English, so I don't represent all the plural and diversity of knowledge of my country. That's the same thing like with Global South. So if these people, they're not in these power positions, they're not going to input their values, their knowledges, the conceptions of life in these institutions. And usually we grab
as a sorry.
Yeah. Now we can grab because usually like the Global South people who arrive in these positions, they are privileged people.
But you can act as a translator, I guess. And the question then is, are you willing to play that role? And you are. Not all of them are.
Yeah, but usually
complicated.
It doesn't happen like this. It doesn't happen like that. But yeah, I think we have also share these values, but also in ILO, like and all this UN, it doesn't represent what we think is what is labor, what is value.
Thank you. We now got some more comments and questions in the chat, so I think we can maybe go on for a few more minutes, if that's fine with you. Michael Galvin, are you here in person and want to ask your question yourself, or should I read it out?
No, you can do it for me, Lisa.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'll do it. So probably don't have to answer, but we'll try to. Many of the problems described in this great discussion also seem to have spilled into the public services in the UK, where Michael worked. Is this surprising or maybe inevitable? And can it be combated by democratizing all work throughout the huge and complex NHS? Also not a small question, I guess. Janet or Flavia, do you want to start an answer, even though it may not be a complete one? I see you nodding, Janet. Do you want to?
Our NHS is under the process of implosion right now, with strikes in all sectors, and so it's a big issue.
Janet, do you want to respond to that?
I'm wondering if I have the right answer for this, but my question. Well, I feel like we are in a current state of information age where people are beginning to see what others are doing and see what is happening in other areas, and they're beginning to question what they have here, what they have wherever they are. And I see like that's one of the key things that's happening. And the public sector is one of the most targeted areas. I mean, if I were to begin discussing the African public sector, I think we'd have to take another 2 hours. And I feel like this is inevitable, but it's sort of like economies keep on changing and keep on reinventing themselves. And I think we are at a point where, with the new age of work, with online work, with a lot of information being shared globally, with people rethinking how they do work, there's a lot of other things that are coming up that people are beginning to realize, wait a minute, that was not right. And maybe my normal is not right. Maybe I need a new normal. And from a very ignorant point of view, I'd want to say that this is what is happening. And can we stop this? I don't think so. I don't think it's something that we can stop. I think it is something that will keep on happening. As more people are becoming more empowered, resources are being more equally shared. And what will happen is that now people will start pushing the public offices to ensure that there is more equality in terms of resource sharing. And this is just as an effort of trying to ensure that everyone is empowered, because we all know one of the key sources of power is actually amassing a lot of resources. And this is what public services have been being able to successfully do in the past. Now people are really thinking about these things. People are learning about these things. People are seeing success stories about these things, and they want more, they want better.
Well, I can't resist now to throw in just a bit of a slogan from the history of political thinking, which was probably just invented. But someone said, invent the printing press and democracy is inevitable, which is of course very simplistic because it took a couple of centuries. But sometimes I wonder whether we should also think that invent the internet and all its communicative structures and democratic work becomes inevitable. That would be the positive note. But before we end, there is a comment that I would like to read out because I've been asked to do so, from the University of Philippines, and I'm going to not pronounce this correctly, apologies, Maractas Amante, who says that their grad students are also logging in and they will discuss this webinar in their graduate class because the labor laws in the Philippines are mostly a product of Spanish civil law, contractual wage labor, and American New Deal era laws on industrial relations and union regulation, minimum wages based on living wage definition and composition of a family with a breadwinner based on Leo 13th Rerum Novarum. So that's the Pope's encyclopedia on good work, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So there's still they have to fully liberate our colonial labor laws and wage systems in the Philippines. So, oh, there's a second comment, and that says the Philippine Supreme Court recently denied that when the status of the employment is in dispute, the employer bears the burden to prove that the person whose service it pays for is an independent contractor rather than a regular employee with or without fixed terms. So that's what the court decided. So if I'm understanding this correctly, it's a shifting of the burden of proof of who is an employee or isn't to the employer. So in case of doubt, the assumption is that it is an employment relation and the employer has to prove the opposite, if I'm now trying to understand this quickly. Thanks for sharing the link for that. But we're now really coming to the end of things. So Flavia and Janet, do you have some brief final words that you want to share with us?
I want to thank you, everyone, for being here, for being interested in decoloniality, because, like, when we talk about decoloniality, people have the wrong impression that we want to put fire and everything, and they just nominate us as radicals. And when we talk about decoloniality, we want just to situate knowledge. We just grab these categories of labor law that were framed in a Eurocentric, not European perspective. Like there was a first question at the beginning about Greece. Of course, that their culture and knowledge paradigm is not hegemonic in Europe, right? So when we talk about Eurocentric knowledge, we're talking about a rationality in modernity. There is like a dominant knowledge production, labor law, regulation, and the conception of value. And decoloniality is how we can situate knowledge in each site in a geopolitical perspective. and considering other factors, that race, gender, can also influence this knowledge, because there is no neutral knowledge. That is a fiction. So we don't want to destroy things. We want to make space for epistemic pluralism. And that's how we want to engage it, to expand the protection, not to destroy the protection that is already there with employment relationships. So I think that's the message that I want to leave, because that's
Thank
what
you
I
so
face
much, Flavia.
when I talk about decoloniality.
Thank you so much. Janet.
I think mine is a short one. Just that let's not assume that what we know is actually reality. And what we know, for example, about the global south, about Africa, what we know about the nature of work, what we know about the platform world, let's not assume that what you know is reality. Just let's try to find out what's actually happening on the ground. And then we can be more re-educated.
Thank you so much, both to you as two great speakers and to everyone who participated here, also to quite a few people in the background who helped set this up, send out invitations and so on. Before I end, let me say that we'll continue the series on December 1st, 2 p.m. Paris time, with a session on working less, living more, ? Which is going to be about work time reduction proposals from the perspective of different countries. So we want to continue the conversation about what is work, what should it be, how can we make it better, and learn from each other. Hopefully not staying with, abstract ideas, but you, Janet, just said so nicely, understand what the realities out there are and think about them critically and constructively. So thank you so much, everyone, and hopefully see you the next time.